Hello, everybody. My name is Kate Wexell, and I'm the founder of the Compass College Consulting. So, welcome back to Debt Free Degrees, which is my weekly podcast. So, for the first time ever, I am actually going to be combining the podcast version that you can view on Spotify with the version that's on YouTube because it was getting to be a little bit too much to be trying to post on each different platform with separate topics. And I figured that just providing both an audio and visual format would probably be more beneficial for everybody. So if you're listening, don't worry, you don't have to actually watch this. You can continue listening during your morning commute, while you're doing chores, or while you're doing homework if you are a student that's listening to this. And if you're one of my viewers on YouTube, you can continue to view this. My only disclaimer is that this week I'm actually in a hotel room, so the lighting is not fantastic, but you know what? We're working with it. I actually, in this podcast recording software, they have a feature where you can try to create a little virtual background like you can on Zoom or Google Meets. And it said that my hardware couldn't even handle it, but I had this super, super cute little boho chic room. I had some books in the background, the sunlight coming in through the window panes. Like, it was gorgeous. But you know what? My computer just said, screw you. You're stuck with whatever this thing is. And your dark little blue bed over in the corner. So we're gonna get through this. Anyway, today's topic is my experience with the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarships. So I am going to briefly go through what are these scholarships, how did I end up applying, what were my results, and then some of the takeaways. And this is mainly inspired because I actually created a LinkedIn post. If you guys want to check out my LinkedIn page, send me a connection request or a follow. Anyway, I created a LinkedIn post about my experience within these programs, and it actually went LinkedIn viral, which I know is not the same as going viral on other platforms. I'm pretty sure that TikTok viral means that you've gotten like 1 million views, but for LinkedIn, getting over 50,000 views, I think is a pretty big deal. And especially because it's very catered towards the people who would actually care about this topic, which is hopefully you guys as listeners and viewers. So let's sort of get into this. This is going to be a slightly more casual conversation today, but pretty much the Marshall Scholarship, so if you are not in academia or if you're not a student trying to attend graduate school, you probably have absolutely no idea what the Marshall or Rhodes Scholarships are. However, you might have heard of something called Fulbright. So Fulbright would be an example of another fellowship that would provide funding for you post-graduation, like after your undergraduate degree, or it can provide funding for graduate school. And so the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarships, they are very similar, and they are known to be two of the most prestigious fellowships in the entire world. Now, why exactly is that? Well, let's go through what each of them are. And so with the Marshall Scholarship, that was created in 1953 by the British government. And so still to this day, the scholarship is run by the British government. And so the entity within the British government is called the Marshall Aid Commemoration Commission. And so the idea of this is that the scholarship will support young Americans of high ability to study for a graduate degree in the United Kingdom. And the entire purpose is so that it will strengthen diplomatic ties between the UK and the US. So specifically, candidates are being assessed on their academic merit, on their leadership potential, and then their ambassadorial potential. And so that's very important, right? The UK wants for US citizens to come study there for 2 years, fully funded to attend graduate school, and then pretty much become leaders in the US once they return, or end up working in academia within the United Kingdom. That seems to be the general trajectory of people who end up receiving this scholarship. And they really want to make sure that the UK is being kept in mind as an ally with US foreign relations. And so with the selection process, there are about 50 scholarships that are awarded each year to US students. It's only open to US students who are about to graduate college or who have just graduated college within the last few years. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Then with the Rhodes Scholarship, this one is slightly more selective and it's actually international. So This was established in 1902 by a guy named Cecil Rhodes, and so it's now managed by the Rhodes Trust in Oxford. And so pretty much the purpose is that it is, just a scholarship or a trust like anybody can set up in the world, but it's for outstanding students from around the world to study specifically at Oxford with the aim of cultivating civic-minded, morally grounded global leaders. And so when this guy, Cecil Rhodes, was actually creating the scholarship over 100 years ago, he created some criteria. And the important thing to note is that the Rhodes Scholarship was sort of the first of its kind. Fellowships for graduate school didn't necessarily really exist before he did this. So it's been a worldwide model since then. And so candidates are evaluated on their academic excellence, energy to use their talents to the fullest, integrity, and a commitment to making a difference in the world. And then previously, they did sort of factor in also your athletic achievement because that's what he specified. That has since been taken out. It's also been controversial because at first it was only white men who were allowed to apply to this, and now it's open to women. And also, it's been expanded so that every single country that used to be part of the British Commonwealth is now included. So there are tons and tons of people who are allowed to become Rhodes Scholars now. And so then within the US specifically, there are 16 districts that the Rhodes Scholarship is broken into across the country. And so that's sectioning it off regionally. And then within each of those districts, about 2 people are selected each year to become Rhodes Scholars. And so what are some of the similarities and differences? Well, both the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarships are specifically to attend graduate school for 2 years, potentially more if you're choosing to study a PhD, and it is all fully funded. Similarly, these are also very, very selective. They both have a less than 5% acceptance rate, and they are partially designed for diplomacy. However, the Marshall Scholarship is like directly focused on diplomacy between the US and the UK, and the Rhodes Scholarship is more just focused on well-rounded individuals. And then the other differentiating factor is, along with that ambassadorial potential that draws them apart, the Marshall Scholarship is actually for any university within the UK that's partnered with the program. And they will specifically be looking at which universities that you have chosen will actually best fit the program that you're applying for academically. Whereas the Rhodes Scholarship is just to study at the University of Oxford. So if you're applying to the Marshall Scholarship and you choose Oxford for some academic subject that Oxford is actually not great at, then the Marshall Scholarship might be thinking, you only applied to this so that you could go study at Oxford, and this isn't actually the best path for you. We're going to reject you. And so then how it worked for me, and this will sort of illuminate the process just a little bit more, is that at the end of my time during my undergraduate degree, I started looking at potential scholarships to apply to graduate school because graduate school is still super expensive. Pretty much all graduate programs within the US and the UK, unless you have other additional funding, is going to be at least $40,000 per year. Right. That is a crap ton. And so I talked to my fellowships advisor and they were like, oh, hey, we just opened up our nominations for the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarship. So at least how they did it at my university, which was the University of Missouri Columbia, is that everybody who is interested in either the Marshall or Rhodes Scholarship, they would fill out the same little Google form. And so that was back in May. And pretty much what we had to do was answer a couple of essay questions that were modeled based off of the essay questions that they actually ask you in the scholarship applications. I had to submit my unofficial transcript and my CV. So I had about 1 month to do that. And so then in June, there was a selection committee through my university. So they had chosen people who had previously been Marshall and Rhodes Scholars within the state of Missouri. They also had a Missouri Supreme Court judge and different professors who were very well known in their fields to have a little committee. So then they actually interviewed every single student at my university who had wanted to apply to one or both of those scholarships. And so that is also based off of what people would actually have to go through for these scholarships. So pretty much the entire nomination process at my university was like a mock version of what it would be like to actually go through the finalist round of the Marshall or Rhodes scholarships. So whenever I was doing my little interview through Zoom, they immediately were quizzing me on what I had said that I wanted to do in the future. So I knew from previous fellowships experience that pretty much what these scholarships and fellowships are looking for is that you have a very, very clear and defined path, and specifically that you want to do something at a very high level, right? Like, no university is going to pay for you, or no scholarship is going to pay for you to just go get your master's in computer science to then continue to work at whatever tech company you're at. However, they might pay for you to get your master's in computer science if you're saying that you want to create the next Google or the next Microsoft or something like that. Similarly, they're not going to be paying for you to go to graduate school if you just say, like, oh, I want to get this degree in international relations to go work at a nonprofit that nobody has heard of. But if you say, oh, I want to be the Secretary of State one day, well, now that's a position of power that could actually be beneficial to them, and you would be one of their notable alumni, right? So I had put down at the time that I wanted to be the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. And so the very first question that I was asked is, who is the current Secretary of Housing and Urban Development? And I went, but I was able to recover from that question. It turns out that our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development had actually just changed out, and there was somebody filling in as an interim, like within the past 3 months. So it actually didn't end up affecting me that much. They also asked me about things like my career with piano, and I had been thinking that they wouldn't even ask me about something like that at all. That was just a hobby of mine, when my entire application was focused more around sustainability and urban planning. But they did talk to me about that. They also asked me a lot of questions revolving around housing policy and some of my experiences living in San Francisco. And so that was definitely modeled off of what it would be like. And so then I had to wait about a week, and then I received the email saying, hey, you have been nominated by the university to apply to the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarships. Because the thing is, it does differ a little bit between the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarships, but for each of them, you have to have a nomination from your university, and there are actually limits that are placed on how many people you can nominate. So for the Marshall Scholarship, I believe that it's only 3 people from each university. For the Rhodes Scholarship, on the other hand, we see like 10 kids get the scholarship every year from Harvard. So there's clearly not that cap on that, but my university did place a cap of 3 people for both scholarships. So there were 3 of us who were each applying to both of the scholarships, and we were all recent grads. And so then we had known by about late June that we needed to go through this process. And so then the deadline for both the Marshall and Rhodes scholarships are mid-September to early October. So you have a couple of months to get everything prepared. I know that other schools didn't finish their nomination process, especially at big Ivy League universities. They didn't finish their nomination process until late July. And so then you have a pretty quick turnaround time where you have to obtain all of your letters of recommendation, update your CV, submit your official transcript, and write several different essays, pretty much saying, this is my entire life story and exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life. So in July, I started asking people for letters of recommendation. So the Marshall Scholarship requires at least 2 academic recommenders, and then a third person can be either academic or professional, but they cap it at 3. On the other hand, the Rhodes Scholarship requires at least 4 academic recommenders, and you can have up to 8 recommenders in total. So, of course, I did not ask like for different people to write the letters for each scholarship. But I did ask 7 people overall. And so the way that I categorized it was I thought about which classes have actually impacted me the most. I thought about the fact that one of my professors in one of my favorite courses, we had actually studied abroad at Oxford for a little bit during my undergraduate degree, and he had been a Marshall Scholar. So, of course, I asked him. I asked a professor that had helped me out with an internship that I did that was related to policy and housing. I also asked the person within government that I had worked with on that project to be a letter of recommend or be one of my recommenders. Then I asked my research mentor, just so that people could see like I am capable of academic research. I asked also a professor that had run more of like a food insecurity challenge course, because I thought that that would be very beneficial to show that I could think outside of the box, that I could create and synthesize my own ideas, and that I was dedicated to helping other people. And within that institute in the university that runs that program, I had been part of another program that was more extracurricular, where I had actually ended up founding a nonprofit through that, or at least they had paid for me to found my nonprofit that already existed to sort of carry out my project that I developed through that. And so that institute is run by a former chancellor of the university. And so he and I have kept in touch. And so I asked him for a letter of recommendation. And then I asked a former boss for a letter of recommendation. I think that's 7. Looking back on it now, I probably could have been more specific, because my application did not end up being about urban planning. It ended up being more about sustainability and education. So I could have asked more people that I've worked with professionally on educational nonprofits to write me letters of recommendation, as opposed to some of the letters of recommendation that were more related to the internship that I had done, that was far more about housing and policy than it was about the environment. But anyway, it took them about a month. I did send very, very specific instructions. However, in most cases, you're not going to be able to read the letters that people submit for you. You just get to sort of see like, oh, this person has submitted to the portal, and you can invite them to the application portal to leave you a letter. And then in August and September, I was trying and trying and trying to think about, okay, what am I going to write for these essays? And so, just for context, there is only one essay for the Rhodes Scholarship, and it asks, who am I? So you have 1,000 words to write who you are and tell your story in a compelling way. And then on the Marshall Scholarship, they had a similar question, but it was more asking it in an academic context. They did have a specific academic essay where you had to talk about the program. Then there was an essay about leadership and an essay about ambassadorial potential. So you had to make your point through all of those essays for each facet of the criteria that they were looking for. And I think that I had some really, really deep reflection when I was writing each of these essays. And that's the great thing about fellowships. It's the great thing about college applications. It's the great thing about scholarship applications. All of them really, really make you think about who you are as an individual and what you want for life. But the problem for me has always been that there are a billion different things that I want to do. And I was realizing this as I was talking to another friend who had also applied and actually is a Rhodes Scholarship finalist, that sometimes life circumstances end up getting so much more in the way, right? So, like, he was able to stay at his university for all 4 years, and all that you think about when you're in college, at least within this context, is like, oh, let me build up my own organization or my own thing, and let me pursue this interest of mine very, very deeply. Whereas I graduated college early, and already I had been living in San Francisco for my second year and my final year of college. And I had to witness just how difficult it is to end up struggling financially, and how you kind of just have to take jobs that come to you, even if they're not the most relevant thing for what you want to do. And you may not necessarily have the time then to work on the other things that you actually want to do, because you really just have to make ends meet. And so that's one thing that's very unfair about the process, is that sometimes life chooses for you. You don't necessarily choose what you're involved in yourself, other than you can say no if it's something that doesn't align with your morals. And so as I was sitting there thinking about these essays, I realized, like, I know things that I care about, but also because I have taken in so many different skill sets from so many different jobs that are seemingly unrelated, like, I feel like internally I can do anything that I want. But that also means that I can view myself going down 10 different paths. And that's usually not what any application wants to see. They want to see, I have been working on this thing that I have been passionate about for a long time, and I am very, very committed to it. And I'm going to continue working on it in the future, but at a much, much higher level if you provide this funding for me to do so. And I just don't think that I had a compelling argument. I think that I had a very interesting life story talking about growing up in the Midwest, talking about graduating early, talking about graduating debt free, talking about just leaving everything and moving to San Francisco, talking about dealing with living in one of the worst areas of San Francisco and how much that taught me about the world. But those experiences would be great in a book, not great in a compelling argument about here's my trajectory and my future. you know, and so I think that I already sort of knew going into it that I did not have a cohesive enough story to be a good candidate, even if I have a lot of things on my resume. And so I had submitted everything, and then you just wait about a month or so. So each scholarship, they send out notifications around the same time. And so pretty much how it works after that is at the end of October and the beginning of November, they start sending out emails saying whether you were accepted or rejected as a finalist. And so if you are accepted as a finalist, then each scholarship, they have little scholarship weekends throughout mid-November. So by Thanksgiving, everybody knows whether they're a Marshall or Rhodes Scholarship or not. And so they each select about 20 people from each district. So the Marshall Scholarship, I believe, had 12 districts and Rhodes had 16 districts. So they select 20 people from each district to be finalists. And then from there, Marshall selects about 2 to 3 people and Rhodes selects exactly 2 people. And so you're pretty much given the email saying, hey, you need to show up to interview at this time and this location. And then you have to book your tickets, and within 2 weeks, you have to then be at the interview. And so, how it works is it'll usually be a Friday, Saturday, and potentially Sunday type of thing. Each of them will have these banquets that they throw. So, the first night, you're actually going in, you're having dinner with all of the other finalists and all of these very important people within politics and within government entities or people who have been previous Marshall or Rhodes scholars. And they're sitting there, they're actually going to be the people who are judging you. And so they have already read your file. So you're just talking normally with them, having this really fancy meal. And then the next day, they actually take everybody in for an individual interview. And so for both of them, it's about 20 to 30 minutes per person. And they're sitting there and they are grilling you about all of the gaps that they potentially saw within your application. And then they're also grilling you on current events related to your discipline. So it is known that people really, really need to be studying politics and public affairs and what's going on, especially in the United Kingdom, but also in the rest of the world if they're about to head to their interview. And then by the time that everybody is done with their interviews, they'll take everybody back in, and then I think for Rhodes, they will actually announce right then and there who has been selected. And then I think for Marshall, you get a call within the next week or so. But then you have to immediately submit your applications to the universities that you applied for within the scholarship program. And then the next year, you're headed off to the United Kingdom. And it's really great and exciting. And most universities will create these huge videos talking about each scholar that they have. It's something that people are very, very proud of. So what happened to me was in late October and early November, I did in fact receive my notifications back. Everybody sits there and chats on Reddit about what's going on and which districts have received notifications or not, because they don't all come out at the same time. But then I had been waiting and waiting and waiting for the Rhodes Scholarship notification to specifically come out. And then I got an email. It said in the heading that it was from the Rhodes Trust. And so I actually handed my phone to my partner and I told him, open this email for me. I can't even look at it right now. And he opened it up and then he walked over to me and gave me a hug and he was like, Kate, I'm so sorry. And I went over to my phone and I looked at the email because I had sort of expected that to get a rejection, right? And it said, you have been selected as a finalist for District 12 of the Rhodes Scholarship. And it gave me instructions to fly to Chicago and go do an interview within a couple of weeks. And I was so excited. I was jumping up and down and I was thinking like, "Oh my goodness, I feel like I've worked so hard and this is finally like tangible proof that I have made it and I have done it and I get to attend my dream university at Oxford." Because I've been fantasizing about attending that university for years and years, probably since I was like 13 or 14. It's always been a dream of mine. And even if I hadn't gotten the scholarship, even just being named as a finalist really, really helps you out within the world and within obtaining different jobs, right? And so we were ecstatic. I actually called up my fellowship advisor and I was like, "Thank you so much. You guys have always helped me and you've been so diligent in reading this and sort of guiding me through like which path should I take in life, or like at least helping me sort out my thoughts with that. And I'm just so appreciative to you and to everybody." And I was like, wow, this is the chance that I could be the first person in my family to attend graduate school. And I would be able to maintain being debt free throughout my entire educational process to really, really hone in on environmentalism. And I was going to be studying a master's in sustainability at Oxford. And then about 12 minutes later, I got an email in all caps saying, "Error, you know, this notification was sent in error and please disregard." And I was like, what? What does this even mean? Does this just mean that, it had been sent out, like the first email had been sent out at probably 8:30 p.m. in Central Time, where the district was located, because I applied to it, like, even though I live in California and there was a California district, I've only lived here for about a year. So I applied to the district where my university was located, where I had been born, right? Like I had grown up next to St. Louis my entire life. I spent 19 years of my life living in the St. Louis metro area, right? So I applied there, but it was 8:30 p.m. And so I was wondering, like, okay, maybe they had meant to schedule this email and have it send at like 8 a.m. and they just didn't mean for people to see this announcement right now. Uh, but then I had this feeling of like, oh, no, they made a mistake and I didn't actually get it. And so I called them. I didn't get a response, but there had been a phone number that was left for the contact person for the district in the email. And then she ended up giving me a call back within a few minutes. And she was like, "I'm so sorry that I have to tell you in this way, but you were actually not selected." And it appears that there was actually an issue within their email system. So I know I've done a lot of email marketing for work that I've done with different nonprofits. And so within email marketing software, you can usually select categories or subsets of people that you want to specifically send an email to. And I guess they had selected the wrong option. So they had placed everybody into the categories of either the finalists or the non finalists. And they selected the category for non finalists. So every single person within that district who was not actually a Rhodes Scholarship finalist received that same email, only to be followed up by being told, like, "Oh no, actually, you thought that you were cool, but we're taking that all away from you." And I felt really, really angry. I mean, that ruined the entire rest of my night. By the time that I was rejected by the Marshall Scholarship, which, to be fair, was a bigger district because I was being considered with every single person from the entire Midwest in a Chicago region. Like by the time that I got that rejection a few days later, I was prepared for it. I didn't care at all. Like it was to be expected, right? But in that moment when I received the call saying, "Oh no, you are not in fact a Rhodes Scholar finalist," I like lost it. And I had gone to dinner with my partner. We ended up going to get ice cream after, and I spent the entire dinner like sitting there thinking like, what have I done that wasn't good enough? What else could I have done? Could I have worked harder? You know, what do I even actually want to do? Should I even still apply to graduate school? Is it worth it if I have to pay $40,000 to go through the same program? And like, what would have happened to my relationship with my family by moving away to Europe for a year? What would have happened to my relationship with him or my friends? And like, did I actually want to leave? And like, what is actually my purpose and trajectory in life? And that same week, I had been talking to a lady who is in the C suite at LinkedIn. And she had gone through my LinkedIn page and she was like, Kate, I can't tell what it is that you do or want to do. Like, you have so many things on this list of what you have done, but what do you actually care about? That part is not clear. So I had a bit of an existential crisis there at dinner. Thankfully, my partner was wonderful, and my parents called me, and they were like, "Oh my goodness, Kate, we're angry for you." Um, but it really makes you contemplate, especially when you get those rejections. Not that it's the end of the world, not that people don't do incredible things all the time without being a Rhodes or Marshall scholar. Like, it's really not that the scholarship makes you a great person. It's just like any other selective process where a certain entity, whether it's a university or an award or a company, they just get to take responsibility and ownership of your own achievements and success, which isn't necessarily fair, right? And it's also a way for people to categorize you despite what you actually have to offer and despite your work ethic, right? Um, so it's not the end of the world, right? Like, it's not a huge deal in terms of the meritocracy. Um, However, these are always fantastic opportunities when you receive a rejection, either from scholarship, from a fellowship, from a university, from a job, from an internship, to really sit there and contemplate, like, who am I? What do I really want to do? What do I want to do when I'm not sitting here trying to win an award, right? Who am I whenever everybody else is gone and I'm just sitting here contemplating my own thoughts and my own desires? You know, what would actually make my life meaningful? And it's very rare otherwise that we get the chance to really, really think about that. And honestly, if you're listening to this, I would love if you sat there and if you thought about it. Because I did. And I realized, like, you know what? I'm not necessarily entirely happy with where my life is headed right now. And I really, really want to focus on sustainability and on climate change. And I think that there are fantastic, incredible communities that are built around environmentalism. And I want to figure out, how can I bring together my skills and the work that I've been doing for the past few years within communications, within marketing, within public speaking, within community outreach, within graphic design, web design, within lobbying, like all of these things that are very much me talking to the public and me trying to communicate with people and me trying to educate people, convince people, and do lobbying and fundraising. How can I bring that together also with my way of thinking about problem solving and considering everything in the system from a policy perspective? Like, how can I use that to make the world a better place? Right. And I'm not entirely certain how to do that yet, but nothing else in life really matters that much other than the people around us, right? It's about helping people, and it's about the people around us. And I think that if I hadn't gotten that rejection that day, and if I hadn't gotten the rejection in quite such a substantial way, then it wouldn't have shocked me out of that and made me realize, like, okay, I need to change things. I need to, really figure out, where am I going? And so I did decide after that I am still going to apply to graduate school, and I'm not going to necessarily apply to some of the programs that I said, because I had put in my application that I was going to study sustainability programs for 1 year and then educational programs for another year so that I could create like an ed tech platform to teach politicians, other corporate officials, and constituents about environmental policy. But as I've learned from working for a bunch of different educational nonprofits, that's not always super, super effective. You have to first find an audience that's dedicated enough to sit through that and listen to it. So it's not a good way to find like new initial people to view it, right? You're not reaching the audience that you really want to, who doesn't know about these things already. And so instead, I realized, what if I studied climate finance, right? Like, how do we reorganize and reallocate the funding that we have, whether it's through private funding like venture capital, private equity, angel investing, or even corporate gifts? And how do we reallocate government budgets to make sure that we are pursuing the solutions that are going to work, the solutions that are emerging, the research that needs to happen to find new sources of energy, and how do we actually make sure that all of this can be implemented. So I am going to apply to several schools in the US and the UK to study climate finance. So you guys might be able to follow my journey with that in the future. And I'm definitely going to share information on this little podcast and these videos about exactly what is my process for applying to graduate school and finding funding for that, and whether it's even worth it if I don't find the funding here in the next year. But I am going to go down that path. Now, another note that I have to say about this, specifically with these scholarships, and this is more of what I shared on LinkedIn that went viral, is first of all, I am super, super disappointed by the Rhodes Trust, right? The Rhodes Scholarship is supposed to be the #1 scholarship in the world. And so, in terms of scholarships, to put it into perspective, this would have been like me applying to Harvard as an undergraduate student, and then Harvard sending me an acceptance letter, followed 12 minutes later by saying, oh no, sorry, you actually weren't accepted to Harvard. It was on that same type of level, just with less applicants, you know? But it was that same type of thing. So how disappointed would you be in Harvard if they had done that to you? And that's kind of how I feel about the Rhodes Trust, but at the same time, it made me realize everybody involved in these systems are so human. And sometimes we let these types of things, whether it's applying to college or, yeah, all the different categories I already listed, we let this have so much power over us and our own self-worth. And I know I've made a YouTube video about this, talking about like if you're applying to college, first of all, you can do it. You can afford college if you work hard enough to find the different resources that are out there, or if you make the strategic decisions to choose programs that cost less. And, you know, if you go through and put in the effort, you can always do it, right? But also, if you don't get into something, a rejection is just a redirection. And it is not somebody saying that you are not good enough and you're not worth it, right? It's just somebody saying you don't exactly fit our criteria, which is to be expected because we're all different people who have different needs and different outlooks in life, right? So, in a way, now, like looking back, it's actually kind of funny that somebody screwed up that badly. And it made me realize, like, if I do end up applying to the Rhodes Scholarship again, because you can apply several times up until you turn 25. But if I do apply again, like, I'm not going to sweat it. It's not a big deal, right? But then the other big takeaway is that even though they do screw up pretty badly, and even though they are still human, and even though it isn't really a thing that should matter to be putting on our resume and our LinkedIn profiles and all of that, like, it still does matter in terms of the fact that these scholarships are out there and they provide so much funding to students to make sure that grad school is actually a possibility for people. And having those scholarships out there, having resources to be able to apply to these scholarships, and to have somebody looking over your essays, to have somebody guide you through this so that you could potentially win, you know, $80,000, like, that is huge. So if you're a parent out there, definitely be urging your kids to apply to different scholarships and fellowships. There are, of course, so many out there for different disciplines, for different locations, and there are different requirements with everything, of course. If you're a student, you should also be looking into this. Like, talk to your fellowship advisor, talk to the fellowships department at your university. And then if you are somebody who's just out there in the community and you do have a sizable amount of money that you could set aside to fund scholarships for students, that is so, so, so beneficial. And you are actually changing people's lives, right? Like, you are the one who is making a difference between somebody being able to start a family and buy a house in their 20s or early 30s, or somebody being in debt from student loans all the way through their 40s or 50s, right? You are that change, okay? So I know that this has gone on for a really long time, and I really appreciate everybody who has listened to this. It was a very dramatic experience that I had going through the Marshall and Rhodes Scholarship application process. But if you guys would actually like to just chat with me about your experiences at college, your experiences with fellowships and scholarships, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can always reach out to me on Instagram. My handle on most platforms is thecompass.online. And you can also follow along for more content and more information specifically about how to graduate college debt free. All right. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.